Reject.
Hi. Can everyone hear me OK at the back? It's fine? Yeah? All good? Cool. Well, I will just start by saying thank you very much for having me to speak. It's an incredible honor and a pleasure to be here and to be part of this great JavaScript community. Maybe I'll start and introduce myself a little bit. My name is Melanie. I'm lead web developer and co-founder of Little Web Giants. We're a small digital agency. We do websites and online marketing. I am actually pretty much a self-taught developer. My background is in environmental activism and social justice work. So I'm not really here to talk to you about any kind of like amazing, higher-level, cutting-edge, brand-new ECMAScript stuff. I'm kind of reporting back from the trenches of some practical stuff that I've experienced in my work and wanted to kind of share with you guys today. In our work, we do... Sorry? No. We do a lot of work with not-for-profit organizations and the renewable energy industry. And as part of this, we're working a lot with organizations that are receiving government funding. And this kind of plays into why I became really interested in this topic of accessibility, because, well, for a start, often if you're receiving government funding, there is some compulsion that you should meet a minimum accessibility requirements in the web products that you develop. And I think also it's for me, a really burning and important issue, because I think access to the internet and access to all the information and tools and communities that are available online is an incredibly transformative and powerful thing in people's lives. And at a time when we're seeing the internet is kind of becoming more closed and more proprietary software and kind of closing off into these walled gardens, ensuring that everyone everywhere has access to free and open information and free and open internet, I think is really one of the most important social justice issues of our times. So today I'm just going to show you some kind of little tips and tricks that you can use to hopefully not so much effort to implement, but can actually really radically transform how accessible your web projects are to a wide range of people. OK, so starting from what do we mean by accessibility? When we hear this word, we often tend to think of it in terms of, oh, we need to cater for people who have specific disabilities. We can kind of broadly break this down into people with some sort of visual impairment, or they're blind, auditory, unable to hear, a cognitive issue, so this might be either an intellectual disability or a learning disability, or people who just, their first language is not the language of the website in question. And then finally, we have motor disabilities, so this is relating to how well or not well you're able to move, which of course then relates to how well you're able to control a mouse and a keyboard. So we tend to kind of think of these groups as being served by specific assistive technologies. So if you have visual impairment, then some of the tools you might use include screen readers. So on Mac, there's the VoiceOver. For Windows, there's this software called JAWS. Other approaches we can take as designers and developers is to ensure our designs are very legible, not kind of too cluttered and things like this. If there's auditory impairment, then we can kind of serve people who have this problem through the use of subtitles or the use of alternative text for audio or video content. For people who have some sort of cognitive impairment, then it can be really, really useful to supply alternative content in the form of simpler text. It's easier to understand, and maybe supplemented with images as well. In Germany, there's like this kind of concept is actually formally legislated, and it's known as leichte Sprache, so that's easy speech. And you can actually hire someone who will do translation from kind of normal German to this leichte Sprache for you. And then finally, when we're looking at motor impairment, then we tend to think of how can we make our websites navigable using the keyboard, so that people who maybe are not able to control a mouse particularly well have an alternative way to access the information on a website. So this is quite a sort of literal interpretation of what accessibility means. So we identify a disability or a set of disabilities, and then we identify the assistive technologies that we should work to support. But I do like to think about accessibility as a little bit more broad than that. As I said earlier, I think it really comes down to a big social justice issue. And so it could be more than just people that we would consider as falling under some kind of banner of disabled. So accessibility is also thinking about how do we make our work inclusive to people across a whole range of age spectrums. How do we reach out to older people? How do we make sure that information is also accessible to younger people? People might have different educational, cultural backgrounds. So if you're seeking to provide information, maybe you need to think about the sort of stories or metaphors or parables that you're telling that might not apply to certain cultural groups that you're trying to reach. And depending on the purpose of your project, internet bandwidth may also be an accessibility issue. You know, if you're trying to send like 20 megabytes of really beautiful, high-resolution images down the line to someone in like sub-Saharan Africa, you're not really serving them at all. So it really can depend on the needs of your project, but I think thinking about accessibility is really thinking in as broad terms as possible, how do we reach an audience, serve an audience, and empower people. So I'm going to talk briefly about the kind of legal frameworks that exist and some of the like W3C specifications that exist that we should be trying to fall in line with technically. And then in the final part of the talk, I'll talk a little bit more about how you can apply that in a more practical sense. I'll try and whip through this legislation stuff because it's a bit boring. Okay, so we have the UN Convention of Human Rights, of Rights with Persons with Disabilities, recognizes access to the web as a right that should be respected, a basic human right. So we, I think, have a really strong ethical obligation as people who are very empowered, who are very savvy users of technology, to make sure that other people who might not have the same access and the same rights and abilities as us are able to get that access as well. And there are legislative frameworks to support this. So I'm familiar particularly with Germany, the UK, and a little bit the US, but there's frameworks in other countries as well. This doesn't usually apply to the private sector, but it will apply to government organizations and to many non-profit organizations that receive government funding. So it's kind of good to be aware of these basic frameworks. Unfortunately, it's quite hard to find practical examples of how to take this legislative framework and the rules and the specs and turn it into something practical that you can kind of just use in your everyday workflow. And I kind of think of this a little bit like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and you had this problem with like 2 floated divs, and then the next div is coming up here, and you're like, what's going on? And then you're like, I need a clear fix, get down there, div, do what you're supposed to be doing. And there was like this kind of whole debate in the community, how do you achieve this really simple layout of like 2 divs next to each other and 1 underneath? And now we just have the clear fix, and if you're like me, you just like add include clear fix, and you're done. And that problem is kind of been solved by the community, and there's a default kind of way of just making that work, which I don't think really exists for a lot of this stuff that we're talking about in terms of how to make websites more accessible. So one of the things I'm trying to do here today is to give you some kind of practical stuff that you don't need to think about too much, to just apply. Okay, so then we come to standards and specs. W3C, of course, big bad boss of the internet. They have 2 kind of relevant specs that we can use as guidelines for what we should be doing in our web projects. The first one is, I'm going to say VCAG, because I've lived in Germany for 5 years, I can do that. So this is kind of an older guidelines, and this is a set of recommendations for how we can go about making the web more accessible. And it breaks down, at a higher level, we can kind of say it's these 4 ideas. So everything on the web page or website should be perceivable. Okay, that's fairly clear. So you should be able to read the text. It shouldn't be hidden too obscurely. Or if there's video or audio, there needs to be alternate content that explains what it's about. Okay, it should be operable. Yeah, again, pretty straightforward. We want people to be able to navigate around our site, so don't have things where you click and the button runs away or whatever. Pretty straightforward. Understandable. So this is about providing user feedback and kind of conforming to design patterns that allow people to more or less know what they're doing. And robust. So this is about forward compatibility and complying with standards, which we all do anyway. So it's divided into 3 priority levels, and this WCAG guidelines basically forms the basis for most legislation that's in place. I will talk about that a little bit more. So the problem with the WCAG is when you really kind of break down what's going on there, it really is a lot of very, very kind of cross every T, dot every I, alt text every image, title every link, and it can feel like it's this incredibly nitpicky approach where you just have to be focused on all these tiny little details. And then you just start to think, oh my God, I work with a content management system, or I work with a content team, or there is no way I'm ever going to be able to make sure every single image on my site has an alt text description. It's too much, it's too hard, I'm just going to give up and walk away. And unfortunately, because this is sort of underpinning the legislation, it's tended to be a little bit of a turn-off for people. So I think there's some other ways we can think about that, which we'll talk about shortly. As well as the WCAG, there's a new standard called WARIA. And this is a recognition that web pages aren't really just the static documents that Tim Berners-Lee envisaged 25 years ago. We have these really rich internet applications where things are being updated or filtered or loaded in all the time. And it's very difficult to alert a technology like a screen reader that something's just changed on the page. So if your vision is fine and you're looking, you can easily see, whoa, something just loaded in there, there's been an update or whatever. But if you're vision impaired and you're reliant on a screen reader to basically read through the page for you, the web page needs some way of saying, whoa, 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 screen reader, come back up to the top of the page, there's important news. So WARIA is a kind of a new specification, or relatively new, that's trying to reflect that and allow a way basically for us as developers to communicate, or the browser to communicate to assistive technologies that something has changed on the page. Won't talk about too much. I will skip through the German legislation because it's quite boring. But I will talk a little bit about the UK legislation, because I think the UK has taken a slightly different approach, which I think is really, really fantastic. So there is one set of legislation which is really based on this WCAG standard, and that's really make sure your alt text is there, make sure your links have titles, really black text on a white screen, thank you. But they also have this other document called the PAS 78. And if you're working on a project where accessibility is an important issue, I cannot recommend enough that you check this document out. It's quite short, it's 20 pages long, it's non-technical, it's intended for a non-technical audience, and the idea is, how do you go about planning a project for accessibility from the very beginning? And rather than taking this really detail-oriented approach, what the PAS 78 encourages you to do is to say, what is the main goal for users of my website? So this is a really task-oriented approach. So if you have an event booking website, the most important thing that users on your site need to be able to do is fill out that event booking form. If it's a marketing or informational website, the most important thing is that people can read the information and maybe fill out a contact form. So it's really, from the very, very start of the project, identifying when people come to our website, what action do we want them to do? What are they coming here for? And then making sure that everybody, regardless of ability, can complete that action. So you might have all this like amazing video and audio content on your site, and it's beautiful, and it's this really rich user experience. But if ultimately at the end of the day you need to just convey a few pieces of information and get someone to fill out a form, it's okay if you don't subtitle all that video and audio. It's wonderful if you can. But really put your effort and your focus and your developer hours in making sure that these key goals of the site can be achieved by all users. And I think what really is wonderful about this is you see that there's just such a really strong crossover between what is good accessibility design and what is good UX kind of user experience design more broadly. They're really not something that's like at loggerheads. It's really thinking from the ground up, how do we enable all users of our site to achieve what they want to achieve? OK, cool. That's the background. Let's look at some code. So the first thing we're going to, I wanted to actually show you what a screen reader sounds like, but I have this demo version of the software, and it's just a bad day for audio up here. So maybe I'll just sort of demonstrate for you. Who's actually listened to VoiceOver on a Mac or... Yeah, a few people. OK, so you have some idea of just how kind of scary and aggressive that voice sounds. When I first started working on this project and started to test, I was just like so horrified and shocked, because on a page like this, what you basically get is something like better accessibility with JavaScript, streak, code demo, WAI, landmark roles, tab, index. And you're like, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, please don't terminate me yet. So it's really, people who use these screen readers to navigate the internet, I just have so much respect, because it's like extraordinarily difficult and just this overwhelming flow of information coming at you. So what we can do is actually make it a lot easier. So rather than it's just like one long body of text that just gets read out in this like huge stream where you're like, whoa, 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 where is the actual content of the page? We can start by marking up the various areas of our page with these things called WAI landmark roles. And this basically tells, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit, the screen reader, or like VoiceOver or JAWS or whatever, what the semantic role of various parts of the document are. So this means that a user is able to basically tab from the banner to the navigation to the main to the complementary to the content info without having to read through everything every time, which is more or less, if you think about it, how sighted users are also scanning through the page. You might kind of read the top part. Once you're 2 or 3 pages into browsing a site, you're not rereading the navigation every time. You're jumping straight to that content area, and you're reading from there. So using these landmark roles, which are basically just attributes that you put on the containing div or the containing section or whatever your wonderful HTML5 semantic container is that you have, you're basically just marking up the page like this. So kind of very straightforward, very easy to do. And if you're already using kind of these HTML5 semantic elements, then this kind of just meshes really well with that. Next thing that you can do, and this is like really probably like almost the most easy thing you can do to improve the user experience of your pages, and that is to give a logical tab index to your pages. Now, if you write this beautiful, from scratch, handcrafted HTML that's like flawless and this polished gem of code, then I am really jealous of you, but I work with WordPress a lot. So you tend to end up with like content that's being pulled in from all over the place, and you've got widgets, and you've got forms, and you've got this, and you've got that, and then they're all throwing tab indexes into the content. And what that means is if I'm using the tab key to basically move between the various elements of the page, I'm going to be like up here, and then I'm down there, and then I'm doing a form, and then I'm over here, and I don't know what I'm doing. So let's take all of that, and let's just wipe it back to 0, so that when I tab through the page, and basically tabbing just takes you from one focusable element to the next, so generally from one link to the next link to the next link, then I'm going to move through the page in a logical order that makes it a lot easier for me to understand. And really, it's just this tiny, handy snippet of code here. Dump it in your projects, and you've just massively improved the user experience for a whole group of people. So it's that easy, folks. That easy. Another little useful fragment is this one here, which is the skip navigation link. So there's kind of some debate about whether this is still necessary now that we have these landmark roles. But you know what? I think kind of err on the side of caution and supporting people who maybe have older technology. And all this basically is a small link that appears only when you focus on it. And it's just an in-page link down to the main content of the page. So as soon as I press Tab and focus on the link, I can see it there. I can press Enter. It will move the focus of the screen reader down to the main content, and we'll start reading from there. But if you're a sighted user or you don't use the keyboard to navigate the site, you'll never even know it's there. So here's just some CSS to show how you can hide it. Yeah, OK. OK, then screen reader text. Sometimes you want to give a little bit of extra information or context to people who are using a screen reader. So this might be, for example, if you're, as we're about to see, showing a map. If you're looking at a map, this is really obvious to sighted users. It's a map. It doesn't necessarily come out that way when you're reading it with a screen reader. Or you might have something that has some specific type of interaction that you have added in extra keyboard controls. So, for example, to filtering or to a carousel, things like this. So you might just need to give a little bit of context that's only relevant to these users. But you want to hide it from sighted users. So unfortunately, if you put display none on something, then screen reader technology is kind of smart enough to know, don't read that bit out. So we have to kind of do this very convoluted little CSS snippet to basically have text that's there in the right place and will be read out by screen readers and will be invisible to everybody else. Cool. So they're kind of some just little small, I mean, I really think these are small things that you can do that don't require you to like jump through all the hoops that you need to get that WCAG kind of certification stamp of approval, but really are going to help a lot of people just have a much, much better experience on your site. I've got a few minutes left, so in the final minutes I'm just going to talk a little bit about how, or the approach that I've taken to adapting some really common libraries to just make the experience for keyboard users and screen reader users a little bit better and more fun. So as I said before, this is definitely not any kind of higher level, amazingly sophisticated code. This is like, this is HTML email we're talking, people. This is like, you have like all the different operating systems and then how they interact with all the different browsers, which then interact really differently with all the different screen reader software. So testing for this and the amount of quirks and just undocumented bugs, it's really a pain and quite ugly. So this is kind of some hacky approaches to sort of making things a little bit better, which I hope you will find useful. So Leaflet is a lovely open source mapping JavaScript library. I use it a lot. If you do any kind of database stuff, it's really fantastic. If you don't want to just work with Google all the time, it's great. Unfortunately, there's some problems with how the Leaflet library works just sort of out of the box. So one of the big things is that every single one of the image tiles has an alt text, and that alt text is the latitude and longitude of that particular image tile. So while you're reading through the page and you're like, that's great, and then there's a map, and I can see there's a map with some pins and some markers in it. If you're using JAWS or VoiceOver, what you get is blah, 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 1, 7, 4, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, and you're like, what the, why? Image 1, 7, 4, 4, 4, 4, and you're like, why did I just get half an hour of numbers read out to me in this meaningless stream, which is obviously like a really terrible user experience. So one of the ways I found to kind of get rid of this was basically to, for a start, I don't know how well you can see the code there, but removing all the images which are providing the shadows on the markers, because they don't really need to be there, and we don't really need to hear the alt text of shadow. We also want to get rid of, what am I actually doing there? Yeah, so we're setting all these other images to have the role of presentation, and that signals to screen readers that this is just here for looks. It's not content, so don't read it out. Finally, we also have a problem where if we have these markers here, we don't necessarily have a really nice kind of logical tab index. So in this one that I've kind of adapted a little bit, what we get here is when we click on the marker, the text inside the marker then comes into focus. So this tells the screen reader, you should now jump, like we're going to give focus to this attribute, and you should start reading out from there. Then when I press tab, I get the close button. So this is kind of the opposite of how the Leaflet library does it by default, and there's sort of a bunch of code there that you can more or less copy and paste and dump into your work if you're interested in using this. Once I close, I don't know if you can see the blue kind of square around this, but my focus comes back to wherever I was before I opened that marker. So this is just actually making all those kind of markers on the page accessible to people who are using a keyboard. Okay, 3 minutes. I'll talk quickly about this carousel. So our carousel, I mean, pick your carousel library. This is mine. I like it. So this is quite easy to adapt so that you're also able to control it using the left and right keys of the keyboard. So another thing we sort of did here, which I kind of found quite nice, if I just tab through, is that when the item comes into focus, we actually then and only then show some additional information that's for people who are navigating using a keyboard. So then once this pops up and I can see, oh, this comes into focus, the only reason why this would come into focus is if someone's tabbing through the page. Then I'm going to give this ability to control it with the left and right arrows. And like most carousel libraries, they're going to be exposing some sort of previous and next event methods, so you can kind of tap into that and give that extra layer of keyboard functionality. I probably don't need to look at that in much detail. Cool. I'll briefly show what I did with Isotope. Again, this is kind of just, this is like would be an awesome case for using this WARIA stuff, which is supposed to kind of alert the screen reader that there's like changes appearing on the page. But the support for that is like patchy to non-existent right now. So maybe in kind of 2 years' time, you'll be able to basically just say, the role of this kind of area is an application, and the screen reader should automatically be kind of watching it and checking for changes to the DOM. But at the moment, it's not. So we just kind of came around to more or less hacking this, where when you select an element and it gets a filter, we just show a small kind of little text here that says 3 items found, and focus is like shifted to that, so that if you're kind of using a screen reader, or you're if you need to use a screen reader, you can't see that there's only 3 items that have been found because you're vision impaired. Instead, we shift the focus to here and provide some other additional feedback about what's happened as a result of that filtering outcome, that filtering action. Okay. Lost my slides. Cool. Okay, have 14 seconds, 13, but I will speak very briefly about testing. Testing, super important. Do as much of it as you can, of course. Functionality testing, you know, there's like, as I said, pick your battles, Internet Explorer. But try to test with as much technology as you can. It's very enlightening, I think, just to spend time working with this software and just seeing how challenging it is to use. You know, if you're on a Mac, it's as simple as just hitting Command and F5 and you can get started straight away. If you're on Windows, like me, the only person in the room, you can download JAWS and have a play with that. Other really, really useful thing to do is task-based testing. So this kind of comes back to what I was talking about earlier about how you want to identify user goals and make sure people can actually fulfill them. So it's really awesome if you are able to work with people who are, have some disability in some way and they're able to give you feedback. So set them tasks. So to say, go to this page and make a booking, find out this contact information of this person, and see if they're actually able to successfully complete those tasks or not. And then and only then elicit some feedback about, like, what do you think about the fonts and the colors and blah, 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 blah. Because it's very subjective. But if someone's able to successfully complete a task or not, that's really what you're interested in here. So that's my time. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found something of use.
Reject.